So we're bolting a turbo up to our 125cc powered 4-stroke drift car. But we're not just bolting a turbo onto this thing. We're installing a fully tunable ECU with fuel injection onto this motor. That should mean we have full control over the tunability of this motor, and we should be able to push it pretty hard with boost and even an E85 tune. That being said, as you can see, we've still got a long way to go before that happens. And the first thing we need to do is modify our frame a little bit, extend the wheelbase and make it a little bit safer before we go ahead and add all of this power. By the way, for everyone asking about this ECU setup, the link is in the description if you want to grab one yourself. This isn't sponsored, they didn't hook me up, I paid full price. Obviously, if you want to wait a little bit until I install it and give you guys like a full review on exactly how well it works. But last episode, we cut the front off our frame. And before we go ahead and make our turbo manifold, which we will be doing later in this video, we have to finish extending the front of our frame. So basically, I'm gonna push it forward as much as I can, and we're gonna add some new metal in here, cut some stuff out that I don't necessarily like and make it look a little bit prettier, but that should give us a bunch more room in the front here so that we can go ahead, mount our turbo and kind of have more room for piping, electronics and all of that, because before it was so compact, everything was kind of just jammed in there. So without further ado, we're gonna get straight into it and extend this frame, get it all back together so we can move on to the stuff we're all looking forward to, and that is the turbo stuff. So we're pretty much ready to start kind of figuring out how we're going to reattach the front back onto the rear of the frame. And I really want to get rid of this old ugly stuff up the front here and make everything look kind of nice and pretty since we have the ability to while we're here. Every part of me wants to rush this so we can get onto the really fun part, which is of course mounting the turbo. But I'm going to put my ADD aside. We're going to take our time. So I've got some new stainless tube here, and what we're going to do is cut it to length, and I'm going to put a bend in it on the tube bender. And essentially what I'm going to do is, obviously this will be like up nice and flat. I will actually put the front wheels back on, and we're going to run a bit of tube bent here, through here, and up into the actual front frame itself. So we'll have a nice bend here. That way it'll join here, here, and here. And then from here, we'll join to the other tube here. So it kind of has 3 points where it kind of meets up. So it's nice and strong. And then up front here, I really want to delete these. So I think we're going to put a new piece of kind of bar in there just to make it look nice and pretty. And of course, our front mount intercooler is going to go like on here, which is like super exciting. But obviously that's a couple of episodes down the line. So let's bend up some tube, of course, without putting kinks in it. You know how it is. I refit the front wheels so that we can take our measurements for our steel reinforcements. Then we mark where we want to make the bends and move to the pipe bender. Getting the angle of the bends perfect always takes a couple of tries, and I'm by no means an engineer or a mathematician. But with a bit of trial and error, I got it right and cut the tube to length. So we've got our bends here. Time to get welding. Let's go. So our tiny frame is now a little bit bigger. The front has now been extended, and I'm fairly happy with the results. So we ended up extending it about 100 millimeters or 10 centimeters, which is quite a lot. And we definitely aren't going to have any clearance issues now. We've got our steering back on just tentatively so we can kind of have a look, but we are way off from any kind of clearance issues now. So that's fantastic. Also just looks pretty darn cool. You add a little bit of legs to it and it starts to look like a proper go-kart now, which is pretty sweet. It should give us a little bit more room for our legs as well, which is quite nice because this thing was quite cramped up when you drove it before, obviously being a kid's quad bike. So everything kind of helps in that sense. I've still got to final weld everything, but I'll do that. Obviously we're going to have to repaint the frame now that we've kind of modified it all, but I'm pretty happy with the design so far. It looks a whole lot better than it did. We still need to add this bit down here that connects up here, and then also at the front here, like I said before, I want to tidy it up, but unfortunately I've run out of the stainless for now. But now that we're happy with how the front is sitting, it means that we can move on to building the turbo manifold, which is what we are all here to see. So first things first, what we're going to do is we're going to remove the exhaust, because this this is no longer needed. I'm thinking we get our max speeding rods turbo and we're gonna have it likely sit on this side. Now the reason for that is because of the way that the turbo is clocked on this side and the fact that we're going to be running a front mount intercooler here. Essentially, the piping is going to go directly from here to the front mount intercooler and then through to our intake throttle body right here. So it's going to be a pretty freaking serious setup. So that being said, we've got to figure out a way to get the turbo manifold from all the way down there to up here where our turbo is going to sit. It's going to look so good though. So first things first, we're going to whip the exhaust off the cart and see how we're going to design our turbo manifold. So we've got the exhaust off and we are ready to mount our turbo. This is literally the hardest part of this build really, is figuring out the location that this turbo is going to sit where it's not going to foul on anything, where it's going to make it easy to run the intercooler piping. Remember, we've got to send oil to this thing and drain it out of this thing into the motor as well. So we've got to take all of that into account when we're thinking about where we're going to put this turbo and how it's all going to work. So what we're going to do first quickly is we're going to cut these tabs off this turbo and we're going to weld this onto the turbo, because effectively that is where we're going to run a silicon joiner. Now one thing that I'm thinking straight away is this is a tiny turbo. Obviously this is quite relatively big intercooler piping if you think about it. So it's going to be interesting to see whether our turbo easily fills that space between the motor and the turbo all the way through the intercooler with boost without any big lag issues. But one of the things we're really hoping for with the setup is we really want it to dose, make all those turbo spoolie dosey noises. And the best way to get that is to have a large volume of boost between the turbo and the motor. So obviously this is version 1, it's all kind of trial and error at this stage. I haven't really seen anyone else do the setup with the kind of an intercooler and all that integrated into these motors. So it's going to be very interesting. So let's low off these ears and tack this bad boy onto our turbo. Then we can figure out exactly where it's going to sit. So now the real fun begins. So we've got the neck welded to the turbo, super happy with that. It's just tacked on at the moment because we are kind of unsure about whether 2-inch is going to be the right size for us. It's quite big, as you can see, compared to like the rest of the setup. And like I said, we're going all out with this build. So we are using pie cuts for all of the joins for the intercooler, which are gonna be so freaking cool. So it's gonna be like really interesting to see whether it kind of is too big. Nonetheless, it's on there now, so that is what we're going to use. And as you can see, I've got the turbo sitting on our block of wood because I'm trying to position it perfectly for where it's going to sit on the setup. Obviously, the turbo is the hero of this whole build, so it needs to be front and center. And I think right there, dang, that looks so freaking good. I cannot believe how freaking carried away we've gotten with this build. Here's our exhaust port on our 125cc motor right here, and we have to get from here up to there, nice and tidily. We definitely have our work cut out for us. Let's get into it.
First up, I cut the flange off our old exhaust as we'll need to build a completely new exhaust once our motor is turbocharged. Once we bolt the flange back onto the motor, it's time to start measuring where we'll need to cut our stainless tube. We're essentially making a jigsaw puzzle for adults here, and it's a super repetitive, time-consuming process of measuring, cutting, and test fitting the pieces until they all fit together perfectly. Although this process can feel super tedious at the time, the end result is always really satisfying and well worth all of the effort. Once our pieces are fitting together nicely, I like to use masking tape to piece it all together and make sure everything has enough clearance from the chassis.
So progress is being made. I'm so happy with our little turbo manifold. Single runner, look at that. Absolutely beautiful. It's in the perfect position up here as well. It's just taped together at the moment. It's all in the perfect position, and now what we need to do is make the flange so that our turbo can bolt to the turbo manifold. So the Max Speeding Rods turbos come with the gaskets, of course, and we're going to use that as the template to make our flange. So we've got our steel here, gasket goes on top. Simply trace around that, and we're going to cut it out, drill a nice big hole here, and then weld that onto our nice new turbo manifold. Then we can tack it all together, and the best part of the whole video, of course, is we're going to be able to mount the turbo onto our turbo manifold, and hopefully it's in the right position. And And here is our beautifully fabricated flange. Look at that. Just like I bought one, but not quite as good. So this simply bolts onto the bottom of our turbo. Hopefully it fits if our calculations are correct. Look at that, boy. How good. Boom. Now for some reason on this turbo, it has like 2 threaded holes and then 2 holes that aren't threaded. So you have to have like a nut and bolt, which is so dumb. So I'll likely just end up welding a nut here and here so that we can have all 4 threaded. But basically now, we should be ready to tack this setup all together. So boom, that guy goes on there, that'll weld there. Oh, everything looks so good. So we're gonna go ahead, jump on the welder, tack everything together, and then we can mount the turbo onto our brand new turbo manifold. And we are one step closer to having this motor turbocharged. So good. So it's the moment of truth. We are tacking the turbo onto the manifold. Let's go. So this is a massive moment in the build. The turbo is now mounted and I'm very, very happy with the current placement of the turbo. So this is how it currently looks. From what I can see, it seems to clear everything. I did have to make some clearance on the actuator here. The brackets that they come with are like huge and very meaty. This went like all the way around here. So we literally just clearanced out the bracket. There's still plenty of it here, so that didn't even affect it whatsoever. The turbo manifold that we've made, super cool. Really happy with how that came out. I wanted it to go like down, across and up to leave this bit through here kind of free, just because we're gonna have a bunch of like electrical stuff we're gonna have to run. This will be heat wrapped. That's why I've MIG welded this. We're gonna TIG weld everything else. But because this is heat wrapped, there's no real point for this to be TIG welded and all super pretty. So we'll MIG weld that. But as far as I can see, the placement of the turbo is perfect. So when you're doing builds like this, it's a constant problem solving process. And now that we've got the turbo on and everything, I don't think we're gonna stick with the 2-inch piping for the intercooler. I think what we're going to do is we're going to lob this off here and we're going to weld a 1.5 inch 90 onto the turbo directly, so it'll come down and 90-degree bend. But I think 1.5 inch piping is going to be a lot better for this setup than 2-inch. The 2-inch just seems a little big. It'll look a little bit intrusive. But what we will do is we're going to do a 2-inch exhaust. So we'll have all of the pie cut bends and stuff for the exhaust, do a super fancy exhaust system. So we'll use the 2-inch stainless piping for that. But here we're going to use 1.5 inch. I think it's just going to suit the build a whole lot more. But like, that is so freaking cool. I actually stood back and just stared at it for like the last 5 minutes because it looks so damn good. So the next lot of problems we need to overcome, of course, is getting oil to the turbo. So we're gonna have to figure that out. Obviously the intercooler piping, and then of course all the electrical side of things as well. So plenty left to do. But I think over the last couple of days, we've made a massive step with this thing. Look at it. She's come such a long way. I freaking love that manifold. It looks sick. I know you guys have been asking for longer episodes, so hopefully this one's longer. I can never tell when I'm filming them. I just edit it, and whatever it edits out to, that's the length of the video. I prefer to get weekly videos out to you guys rather than have like really long videos, but I'm always open to feedback, so feel free to throw a comment below. Hit me with that feedback. If you got any ideas for the drift cart, hit me back with that as well. I've actually got a little surprise for the build as well. We're not allowed to put it on yet because, well, it's not actually boosted yet, but we got a number plate for it. How good's that gonna be? Oof, right on the back there. Boost, baby. It's gonna be so freaking good. But that's a wrap for this video. I'm freaking stoked on the progress we've made so far. Thank you guys, as always, for the support on the build. If you know someone that likes builds like this, feel free to share it with them. It absolutely helps the channel grow, and it's growing very quickly at the moment. The goal this year is 100,000 subscribers. We need the plaque on that wall, so hopefully this build does it for us. Of course, we've got the R32 Skyline build we're still doing as well, so plenty of videos to come. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Peace! Turbo mounted on the cart. This thing is gonna be absolutely crazy. Hopefully it makes some dose noises. Bye!